Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Adobe Live here on the sofa every weekday from 12 till 1. Today, we're welcoming Georgie. Welcome, Georgie.
Hiya, you're right.
Hey, good, thank you. I am, do you know what? I'm excited, but I'm also sad because it's the last in our 4-part series of our collaboration with FemType. And we've had some great sessions over the last 4 weeks. And I was just thinking, we had Racer with InDesign, we had Emily with Illustrator. Last week was Jasmine with Fresco. And today, though, I mean, I'm sad, that those are finished, but I am excited that we have you, Georgie, here today with After Effects.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here, actually.
Oh, that's so good. And I can't wait for everybody to see what we have in store. We've got lots of people in the chat, everybody. Everybody's all here. Let's see real quick. Hello to Gareth. Hey, Richard. Hi, Hazel. I can see you all there. And nice to see everybody back, actually. Hey to Robert and also Blossom as well. So lots of people in the chat today. Can't wait to see. I mean, the brief, of course, Georgie, was to design a poster for some festivals that couldn't go ahead this year.
Yes, it is. I've actually chosen to go with Glastonbury because I went there in 2016. And it's just such an iconic festival that I felt like I had to do it. And I saw the other ladies' streams over the past 3 weeks, and they've just been absolutely incredible. So hopefully I live up to all those 3 ladies and to FemType as well. So I'm really excited to sort of get stuck in and show you what I have in store for you guys today.
Definitely. And you know what? If anybody has questions for Georgie today, make sure you join the chat. We're talking live on Behance. So we're at behance.net/Adobe Live. We're not chatting in YouTube, even though you can watch through there. So make sure you join us in there or on Discord as well. So let's get into it, Georgie.
Yeah, I've actually got a little presentation to run you through. I thought it would be a really good idea just to show everyone sort of who I am, what I've done in the past, what I'm currently doing, I guess, and then sort of jumping into the brief. So I'm gonna jump onto the first slide, which is all about my career. And so many people have their own story of how they got into design, motion, illustration, just anything creative. I think it's really important for people to hear everyone's story because everyone is so different. I hear a lot of people saying about don't go to uni, it's a waste of time, all that sort of thing. My route was uni, and I'm really glad I took that route. So I thought it was kind of important to tell you all how I got to where I am today. When I was 17, I actually quit school. I was planning to go to art school to do fine art, but I quit school and I sort of took a few years out because I had this sort of a bit of a crisis about what I wanted to do, and I didn't know where to go from there. So I took a few years out and I went to a college because I thought I wanted to do video production. When I got there, they said, oh, but you can do graphic design and you can do photography, you can do all these things. So I ended up taking a course where I took everything. I took motion, 3D, design, animation, just a whole range of stuff. And from there, I went on to uni where I did digital media design. And then I got into experiential design at my first agency. And then where I think my career kind of really took off and started to form the style that I have now was at my previous agency, We Are Social. I was with them for 3 years and I ended up on the sports team where I led the design department on that team. And some of the examples of what I did there are on this screen now. So the top left was a video we did with Gareth Bale, and that was back in 2018, where I had to visualize the voice of the speaker that was telling Gareth Bale what to do. So he's saying, "Are you ready, Gareth Bale?" And this kind of sort of techie voice. So I created this typographic animation for that to kind of represent that voice. And then something a bit more recent that I created at We Are Social just before leaving is on the far right, which is the Ultra Boost Instagram story. And whilst I was there, I got known as the Instagram story queen because I did so many when I was there. A lot of them were for Adidas, but we worked with PlayStation and Guinness and Chelsea FC and other sports brands across my time there. And then the two pieces of work in the middle were bits that I've done since I've gone freelance, which was in January, which are becoming much more type focused, just because I get picked up from my Instagram, which is got loads of type stuff. So yeah, that's sort of where I am at now in my career. Yeah.
And do you add like music or sound effects or anything to these, or are they more so like stories in Instagram, you know, as you see them in your feed?
Yeah, I think towards the end of my career at We Are Social, I definitely started to add more noise and sound effects to my Instagram stories. But I have to admit, I'm not the best in sound design. Sometimes, so for the middle piece of work, which is for Vivo Barefoot, that we actually got a sound design person in to create the sound for that. But I did the video edit and the typographic animation for that. So where possible, I would add sound design. But I'm sure that someone else would do a far better job than I would with sound design.
No worries. It's so they're so eye-catching. I find myself really drawn into the Gareth Bale one. As you said, the brief, you know, about that speaker, you're definitely capturing that in there. And it's so good to see type in After Effects, right? It's so good to see it's you know, this motion added to it to add extra impact. I love it.
Yeah, and I actually create, when I use After Effects, I don't tend to use other software to design in, so I design straight into After Effects. So most of the time I'm in After Effects solely when I'm creating a piece of work. Sometimes if I need to, say, cut something out or do some other sort of little tiny bits, I might use Photoshop beforehand and then bring it into After Effects. But majoritively, it's all pretty much done in After Effects.
And do you think the start of your process, you know, do you begin on pen and paper and then move it into After Effects, or do you just start from scratch in After Effects? And yeah,
that's a great question, actually. I start just in After Effects. I know that I should probably write things down or draw things out, but I actually do all that in After Effects. So for me, visualizing what the end video would be is actually just done in After Effects, and I'll start playing around and I'll place something in a position and I think no, and I'll move that around, but all within After Effects because I can actually see how it might look in the end. I think that whilst when I was younger, I loved to draw. Over the years, I haven't done it as much, and I think that using my graphics tablet and straight into After Effects for me is the same as someone who's good at drawing it onto a piece of paper.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't wait for you to share your festival that you've chosen to go with.
Yes. Before I do that, I just wanted to show you a few personal projects, which is all on my Instagram account. And I think here it's quite obvious the difference. So the previous page was quite colourful because it was for brand work and clients, whereas my personal work is very black and white. A few bits of colour bursting sort of through in elements of it. But this is where I really get to play around with things. And it might be that clients ask me to do a piece of work and I might do some versions of it and they'll go with one of them. And the ones that don't get used, I previously would kind of put them to one side and forget about them. Whereas now with my Instagram, I get to replay with those ideas that didn't get picked and post them on here. It's just like little bits of animation as well as more sort of poster work as well. So still design. I find that a lot of my motion work is inspired by still work to start with. And I just imagine how that might get animated in the future. And yeah, onto the festival that I've gone for. So I've actually chosen Glastonbury, and the words that I'm going to be animating are Tune In Tomorrow, which has a double meaning, I guess, because you've got tune, which is music, and then you've got Tune In Tomorrow as in come back when the festivals get to happen again. And I actually went to Glastonbury for the first and only time in 2016, which was the wettest Glastonbury I think ever on record, which was quite interesting in itself. But one of the acts that played there was Adele, who was just incredible. It was probably one of the best performances I've ever seen. And for someone who has like really sad music, it was just it was incredible. She has such a stage presence that you sung along to the music, and then after she would have this banterous nature with the audience that was just absolutely incredible. So my post is going to be very much focused around Adele's performance and the branding and design of Glastonbury 2016. And just before I jump into it, there's the two types that I'll be using today. I just wanted to talk to you guys about Romy by Margot Levesque, which she's an incredible type designer, and I just love her elegance in her work. And then Druck, which is quite a famous font that I've used quite a few times in my work, especially my Instagram work, and that's by Burton Haspay.
Nice. It's good to know actually the type authors and see those in there, so we can all get access to those and use those. There is a question that's already come up in the feed for you.
Yeah.
And this was from Robert, and I'm just scrolling up because suddenly there was a lot of chat. Here we go. So Gareth asks, how does Georgie stretch the type like that without losing quality from pixelating?
So I'm guessing you're talking about the 1 week's past. I think it's all about your export settings, to be honest with you. When I first started at We Are Social, which is a socially led advertising agency, that's where I sort of learned all of my social media, sort of the dimensions and how to export that sort of thing, because social is a very different beast to, say, a normal 16:9 video. And when you stretch the type, because it's all vectors within After Effects, you're going to keep that quality when you export it. But if you export it at a lower quality, then that's where the issues arise. And at the very end, I can actually jump into Media Encoder and show you exactly what settings I use. That might be quite useful for people. And it's also the size of the video. So if you do 1080 by 1080 for social, because it's quite small, that quality will be shrunk. Whereas if you do 1500 by 1500 or 2000 by 2000, you're going to get much better quality on Instagram when they compress it down.
Yeah, cool. Looking forward to seeing this in action.
Cool. Shall I jump in?
Definitely. Yeah.
Lovely. I'm just going to close that and open this. So I've already set up the file just because I am a bit of a neat freak within After Effects. As you can see, I like to have my assets folder, my comps folder. A lot of projects that I do tend to have a 1x1, a 9x16 and a 16:9 edit. So I tend to layer a folder for the first one that I create, and then I've got my pre-comps within that as well. And then I will duplicate that, resize it, and then you have different sizes there. And so to start with, as I mentioned before, the 2016 Glastonbury poster is my main inspiration. So it's got a black background, but the type is all colourful, and that's where the colour comes through in the piece. So I'm going to start with a black background. Sorry, I've got a dry throat. Cool, so I have hit create a new solid, and then I've just changed the background to black and hit OK. And that automatically creates a square. In the dimensions, you can change that to whatever size you wanted, but it will fit to your comp when you create a new one. And in the other piece, I had a frame, so I want to add a bit of a frame to this. I use the Save Guide, which is this button down here, Title Safe Action, as a bit of a guide, because you've got your middle point in the middle cross in the middle, and then you can sort of see that at the top here. And then I use these as guides quite a lot, and you can get to that as a shortcut by pressing the quotes, so on and off. There they go. Cool. So I'm going to start with my pen tool, which is G for a shortcut, and I'm going to start to create my frame. Zoom in for this. Change my stroke to probably about 6, and actually, just so I know what I'm doing as well, I'd like to change the name of the layers, and probably to use too many pre-comps as I go along. And I'm going to change the strokes line cap to rounded. So before that, the ends were sharp, whereas I've just given it a slight curve. And I'm going to hit Alt and the question mark, and that shows the whole comp within my screen here. Actually, I want to change that path slightly.
And do you find there's a template that you normally work to, or do you find that every project is really different?
I probably should use a template, but actually I find for me it's a lot easier just to start from scratch. I don't particularly like doing the same thing over and over again. So if I start from scratch, it kind of gives me the initiative, I guess, to try something new, or just not creating the same thing over and over and over again. Because it's just always nice to push yourself when you're creating stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm going to cheat a bit here, and I'm going to add a mirror effect to this, and it will save me redrawing the line on the other side. So when I click off, I've got 2 matching lines there, but it's actually only on this side because I've added the mirror effect. So as I mentioned, Adele was a big inspiration for me on this piece, because she was just incredible when I was there. So I'm going to use her track Hello as a background for I'm going to create a sound wave at the bottom using her song. So I've double pressed L, and that shows me the waveform. Now, in order to visualize the waveform, I need to have a bit of the waveform actually in the song. So I'm just going to move that along and turn that off. If I create another solid, not a light. So new, solid, and then call this waveform. And then up here, if I type in waveform.
This is such a cool idea. A waveform like this. Like, I don't know, it takes a special mind to think of, really cool. Very cool.
Cool. So I've just added audio waveform effect to my waveform layer. Now, in order to show the waveform, you need to create something to put that on. So I'm going to create a mask, and that literally could be anything you wanted. But for this, it's literally going to be a straight line that I'm going to add. So I've put my safe, action safe, there we go. I'm going to call it safeguard. And then I'm going to add my mask there. So if I go to my audio layer here and I choose Hello by Adele, that should, I've got to choose the path as well, that might help. Cool, so you can already see the waveform coming. That you could also move that to say a more interesting part of the song, or whichever part you wanted to show. So I am literally just going to change this to white to match the rest of the frame. And I'm going to change the thickness to 6 to match the other bit of the frame as well. And I might reduce the maximum height. So if I was to make that height much bigger, you can see that the waveform would be much bigger there, but probably want it about 80. And I've just reduced that softness. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Georgie. We have a question from Annie in the chat who asks, do you plan or storyboard your type work or experiment and push the initial idea?
So for this one, I very much planned it because of the short amount of time that we've got. But normally I will be looking at work, or I'll be looking at a poster, or I don't know, out and about, and I'll just have this idea come to my head. And then I have to try it. So I'll be at home and I'll be like, oh, I've just got to try this out and see what that looks like. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm not too disheartened when it doesn't look great, because it's all about trying and just getting it out of your head. And quite often I'll have an idea in my head, I'll get it out into After Effects, and I think, oh no, that doesn't work, but what about this? And then it generates new ideas off the back of that sort of first idea that comes to play.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to finish the top of the frame by adding a little, I guess, stamp at the top. So I'm going to use the rounded rectangle shape. Zoom in a bit. And then add that in. And then I'm going to use a line to just align that to the middle. Aligning is like my best friend because I'm constantly aligning stuff. Cool.
And the shape that you've used, is this typically for like an Instagram post, or would this be a social media kind of frame size, or would you say that this is more so for this project?
Yeah, so this, I tend to always work in 1 by 1. I guess I've just got used to it and I'm a creature of habit sometimes. But yeah, 1 by 1 is, I tend to start in 1 by 1, and then if I have to resize, I will resize from that, because if you're resizing to 9 by 16, 1 by 1 is a better size to resize to 9 by 16, and the same for 16 by 9. So it's kind of like a middle point just to start with. And then, yeah, I tend to go from 1 by 1 always. And the size for this, I believe, so I'm going to hit Command K to show me my composition settings. So this is 1500 by 1500, which again tends to be what I like to work in. And then I work in a 25, I work with 25 frame rates per second. Cool, so I'm gonna go up here, and this is the first little bit of type that I'm going to start with. So up here, I'm gonna use Druck, and I'm gonna put tune in tomorrow.
Stuart shared in the chat, he says, I struggle with what techniques will give you the right results. So many ways to do things in After Effects. I spend too much time hitting dead ends, and I guess you learn more when seeing others do things. Totally true, Stuart. I've learned so much in Adobe Live in like the few that I've been part of already. It definitely helps to watch other people pick up tips.
Definitely, and I think there's sort of no wrong answer as well. Like if you do hit a dead end, that's okay. Like that's your learning curve for sure. Yeah. I'm always hitting dead ends when I'm creating something or sort of mind blocks, and sometimes I need to just walk away from it and then try again. And also there's so many different ways of creating something. What I'm doing today, someone might look at it and think, oh God, why is she doing it like that? It's just what you feel comfortable in. And you don't really have to explain how you're doing stuff to other people. It's totally fine, however, which way you feel comfortable doing it in.
Yeah, Gareth is in agreement with you there. He says there's no right or wrong way. There's easier or harder.
Yeah, exactly. And some people really like to use plugins. Some people don't. Yeah. It's totally up to you, however, which way you want to use it. Cool. So I'm going to get this to sort of slide across. So I'm gonna probably best to just do it. So I've put my anchor point to the right, and I've got this plugin called Move Anchor Point. There's loads of different ones out there that do the same thing. Some have more functionality, some that change sort of keyframes and things like that. I've just always had this one, so I've got comfortable in using it. It's just a lot easier than having to use the Y tool. But for this, I will actually use the anchor point tool. So I'm going to open up scale, and I'm going to put a scale keyframe here. So I've pressed Alt and S, or you can just press the keyframe button here. And I'm going to turn off the linked Y and X axes. So if I change this to 0, you can see that it's shrunk all the way down to the side, and then put that keyframe at the beginning, and then put that to 100. And then I want to put a position and anchor point keyframe in. So that's option P and option A for position and anchor point. Then I'm going to press the Y button, which is the move anchor point button, hold down Command and Shift, and then I get to, if I click it, and move that to the other side, and that sort of clicks itself into place if you're holding down Command and Shift onto the other side. And then I want to add another scale keyframe and then put that to 0. So what we have here is basically this animation. That's quite slow, so probably want to speed that up a bit. So for this sort of animation, I'm not going to jump into the graph, which is here. I'll be getting into that a little bit later on. Cool.
That looks good.
So for this, I am basically going to duplicate it so it's a constant stream of the words going across the screen. And as you can see, it has to sort of start on, that keyframe there for it to link. So these two like that. Oh,
cool.
Sorry, I'm pressing Command D for this as well, which duplicates your layer. And then I'm going to highlight all of those. I'm going to press Command Shift C, which pre-comps it all. And it all automatically comes up with move all attributes into new composition and adjust the composition duration to the time span of the selected layers. Sometimes you might not want that, but I tend to just keep that click. So top type.
So that just groups everything really, so that it's not going to take up all of your timeline below. Yeah.
Exactly. It's basically a folder within Photoshop. Sometimes you might go into a file and there's just so many layers. Whereas this way, if someone else was to go into my files, they'll say, oh, that's the top type. That makes sense. Okay. So it's just a bit clearer for other people jumping into my work, and much clearer for me as well.
Yeah. I think Joe Allen, who did our Premiere Pro session last week, mentioned the same thing, that he always prepares his project in case someone else was to come in and do work. There is a question for you from Sandrine, who asks, could there be a way to loop it automatically?
There might be. I don't know of it though. This is the way that I do it. Echo is an effect that you can use to echo the movement that you've created. So you could probably get it with that. You just have to probably fiddle around with the settings quite a bit to find how it would work for that piece. That might be a way.
Cool. And we're about halfway through now, everybody. Just to remind you all, we're having a chat in behance.net/Adobe Live. If you've got any questions for Georgie today, then put them in there.
So I'm going to actually add a bit of a grain to all the graphics on this, just because Glastonbury's been going for so long, and actually in their poster, it's kind of it feels quite tactile in the way that they've done it. All the edges are a little bit rough and ready, so I'm going to try and emulate that in my work. So I'm going to add a dancing dissolve mode to this for this top type and for the other elements. So once I've created the whole frame, I can then put that into a pre-comp and then add, in fact, I can do that now. So if I normalize this and then I go pre-comp frame, then if I jump into this pre-comp, add an adjustment layer and add a blur to that. There's loads of different blurs out there, but I guess I just stick to Gaussian blur through habit. Cool. So then if I put dancing dissolve onto that, you can see that it gets all fuzzy. So if I was to go back into my frame and maybe make that a 3 rather than a 4, it reduces the sort of fuzziness. And then when I press play, it kind of has this really small kind of jittery effect to it. And I'll just be doing that across the whole piece as I'm doing it. In fact, I should probably put that waveform in the frame. So you can access a pre-comp by double clicking it as well. It's just probably the easiest way to jump into one. Cool, so that's all. Let me make that a bit taller now. I've got this transparency grid on, but you can just turn that off. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it isn't. That's why it's not in there. There we go. So you notice that I didn't have the song in that pre-comp, so then it immediately lost it. So you have to put the song in the pre-comp or whatever comp you have that effect in for it to connect to that layer to see that waveform.
And that essentially bakes it, right? By putting it in those pre-comps. Is that right?
Yes. So now say if I want to, actually I've decided I want to make this smaller. You can make the whole thing smaller. So I'm just scaling it up and down together. And then you might want it all to rotate. So I can rotate that all. And it just means that if you want to add an animation to the whole thing, it makes it a lot easier to do rather than in within this frame, I would add a null object and then connect it all to the null and then do it. So it just makes it a bit easier if you do it on the actual comp itself.
Yeah, totally. And how long do you think you spend on a project like this, from start to finish?
It really depends. Like this is a little bit more information within it. So you've got the frame, you've got the type in the middle. I'm doing sort of some type on the side and things like that. So it's a bit more intense than say maybe one of my Instagram posts that might just be one bit of type in the middle that I sort of animate there. That could take 30 minutes to an hour, whereas something like this could take up to 4 hours because you're coming up with the idea initially, you're creating it. Sometimes I'll animate a bit of typography and I think, oh no, that doesn't work. I need to try something else. So the idea around it, I think, takes much longer than say the creation of it. That's why it's always good to have something in mind before you start, because I've been sitting here for hours before like, no.
Yeah, totally.
Cool, so I'm going to create some type that goes along the side here, and I've already picked some colors. So I'm going to turn this into a green and make that left aligned. Maybe reduce that size just a tad. So try 90, and then I'm going to move my anchor point using my plugin actually to the edge. And then W, I hit W, which is the shortcut to get rotation tool up. I'll pop that down here. And then I'm going to move that up here. Going to use Romy. Turn that white. Missing an O. So I've actually got this little icon turned on, which is just to turn on all caps. So if you hold if you put caps down on your keyboard, it will come up with, in fact, I'll show you. So if I turn it on and then I try and change it, it comes up with refresh disabled, release cap locks to refresh view. So if you want to type in caps, then turn this little button on and then it will just all type in caps without that issue happening. For this, I actually want to be lowercase. And I'm going to make that a tad bit smaller. Cool. I'm also, to shift between layers, I'm pressing Command and then the arrow button, and then I can just move through my layers being selected there. Cool. And then I'm going to add a line here using the pen tool. And if I double hit U, it shows me all of the elements that are in use on this layer. So you've got your path, you've got your stroke, and then the anchor and position. So if I hit the path, I can then click the points and move them. Cool. So I'm going to animate this tuning, the tracking on it, to move up. And as it does, tomorrow will shrink. No, tomorrow won't shrink. The line will shrink up and down. So it will kind of bounce up and down like this. So to do that, I'm going to hit down the layer, and here where it says animate and the little play button, I'm going to click it and press tracking. So I'm going to start at 0, which is here. I'm going to go to 1 and move that up to about there.
And Stuart has asked you a question. I think he's asked Gareth as well in the chat. Do you pretty much work solidly in After Effects? And you mentioned at the start, Georgie, you do everything that you do is in After Effects.
Yeah, it definitely is. Like I said, I just prefer creating everything within After Effects, just because it's much easier for me to visualize it and then move things around. And I mean, it's good to have an artboard or a storyboard or something like that, just so you know what you're doing, especially for larger projects. So if you're going to do a quick 5-second video, maybe not so much, but if you're going to do a 1-minute video, it's really good to have, this is what's happening here, this is what's happening there, and just sort of layering that out. But in terms of maybe jumping into Photoshop or anything like that, then no, I'm just straight into After Effects.
Yeah. And you know, like in your work that you were showing us at the start, you had the project with Gareth Bale and the speaker. Do you find that if you're working on a project for somebody, you create different versions, or do you go to them with the one kind of finished product?
So at my old agency, we had a team of designers and creatives who worked really closely together. I was really lucky because they were all the creatives there were really talented, and we all worked really well together. And in this that particular project, I worked with a creative called Doug, who is incredible, and he came up with the idea. So this was his piece of work. So he came to me at the end and he said, "We need to create a voice for this machine. Off you go, like run with it." And then I sort of came up with this design ideas and sort of gave it back to Doug, and we kind of worked collaboratively together to say, "Oh, that works. Maybe that doesn't work. That this works," you know. And that was really good to have that kind of feedback and that team to sort of bounce off of each other. And that's where it ended up, I guess, after all of the amends. I think we wouldn't show the client necessarily all of the amends. That was more internal. It wasn't until internally we would be happy, and then we would show them what we were happy with. And Adidas that was for Adidas, that particular piece. They're really great at just sort of allowing us at the time to kind of do what we thought was good and worked with the project. And I didn't get many amends, I don't think, with them, working with them. Yeah, which is always really good. That's a definitely the best way a client can be.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just adding so I've tracked this up and down, and then I'm going to track the tomorrow up and down. So I'll do that quickly. And for this bit, I'm actually going to start using the graph, because if I show you the animation before, actually it's quite slow. Up at the top, because it's a smaller bit of animation, it kind of it doesn't necessarily need it. Whereas for this one, it's quite a bit. It's more in the front. There's a bit more to it. It's, it's a bit larger and stuff. So it's always good to add look into the graph when you're doing keyframes. In fact, most keyframes I do use the graph. So I've highlighted all those keyframes. I've hit the graph button. And again, some animators will say, I have to do it in the value graph, and others say I have to do it in the speed graph. I've just gotten used to using the speed graph. And I think it's quite versatile. It's essentially, when you click ease in and ease out as the tool, it's doing that, except you can manage what that looks like. So this keyframe here, for instance, I've pushed it right to the bottom, because that's the speed. So if I was to put it up here, it would go faster, and up here it would go faster and faster. But this is the speed of that particular animation. What I want it to do is ease in and then ease out. So that graph essentially will look like that. So that's your keyframe. You ease in and it goes up to this speed, and then you ease out and it goes to that speed. And I'm just going to copy that across each keyframe.
Nice. I've never used graphs actually in After Effects, so it's good to see.
I didn't at first, and then I started to use it because, again, in another project, We Are Social, creative was like quite particular on what he wanted the animation to look like, and I was like, oh, I don't know how. And then together we actually found the speed graph, and so he was like, have a play with this, and so I played around, and then I just found the animation was that much better by using it, that I haven't looked back really since.
And can you copy paste that, or would you have to drag each part of the graph?
I don't. What I tend to do is, if these two, so I'd highlight that one and that one, and I would pull those both down, and you can move those two together. Because I've got this one that I've selected, and this one is basically they're going in and out at different times. That it's gone from down and up. If I was just to do this, well, no, actually that was these two. These two are going in and out, and then those last bits are going out. But if you had it all on one line, you could highlight them and then bring them all down at once, and then highlight the other side and bring them all down at once. That way. It gets a little bit tedious if you've got loads of keyframes and stuff. But you can see the difference in that animation compared to what it looked like before. It kind of is more flowy and bouncy. And then I just need to animate this path to go up and down with the type. So if I hit a keyframe here, zoom in for this, and then I just want to move that keyframe there.
And Gareth's got a question for you, Georgie. He says, does Georgie ever use Flow or Ease and Whiz plugins for easing in graphs?
When I first started out, I did use Ease and Whiz, but as I found, as time went on and I started to learn the graph is just so much, there's so much more you can do with it, that I haven't really used it since. And I mentioned the other move anchor point plugins that you can get. There's one, I think, by Motion Design School that has ways of easing in your keyframes and things, and they can add bounce and things like that to your movements. But again, you can do all that within the graph yourself. That I think you've just got more control over it basically than any of the plugins. And also, if you're at the very beginning of your journey with After Effects, if you can learn the graph, I think that's one of the first steps. It does look really scary at first, like it definitely scared me to begin with. But over time, it really helps you out if you have that as a skill. So I'm just going to copy this keyframe at the beginning, and then I'm going to add the graph editor to this. So as you can see, I've highlighted all of those keyframes because they're all above the line rather than above and below. And then I can just move them all at once. Cool. So if I hit Option and question mark, you can see that that's starting to look like that. And then I'm going to just duplicate these keyframes to a bit later on. And you could use things like loop in and out for this as well, but because I only want, which is an expression, because I only want this to do it twice, it's just easier to copy and paste. But say if I had loads and loads of keyframes that I wanted it to flash on and off, for instance, if I do that quickly, I can press Option T, and then the next one, I put that down to 0, and then the next one back up to 100. If I press Option onto the little stopwatch, my expressions come up. And if there's any expression that you need to, that you can remember, it's this one. It's like the easiest expression, and it's the best expression because I tend to use loop out cycle in so much of my work. And you can see now that's just looping out those 3 keyframes that I had at the very beginning here for the rest of that comp, and that will just keep going as long as the comp goes. So just a quick little expression. Let me turn that off. Cool. So I'm happy with that. So I'm going to put that in a pre-comp. Side type. And this is where I'll actually be using the pre-comp just to duplicate it and spin it around. So if I go R, I go 180, and then that's just those 2. And that's quite another easy way of making it look a little bit more interesting and filled up just by swapping it over to the other side, duplicating it and swapping it over. So I'm going to add dancing dissolve to this as well. I'm going to jump in this frame one, steal this adjustment layer, and just add it to the top in here. And then that adds that same effect around it. Cool. I'm going to start doing some type in the middle. So tune. And then I'm going to make it pink. Oh.
I'm still thinking that waveform at the bottom is just genius, that it's Adele's song. It's almost like you'd want to write it in there so that people know, because it's just such a cool idea.
Sometimes though, it's nice to have your own little secrets, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm just going to lay out what I want the type to look like as a starting point, and then I'll start to animate that. So as you saw in the poster as well, the Glastonbury poster, it was all black in the background with sort of like a white framing, and then it was the text that really brought all that color into. So that's what I'm going to be using here. So I press Command A to highlight all that text when I want to make changes to it.
No worries. I was going to say, I saw another question from Annie in the chat in regards to adding sound or audio to your motion graphics. And Annie, that was I think we spoke about that at the beginning, right? That you have used sound in the past, but it's not something that you add in a lot of your designs, Georgie. Yeah,
and I mean, sometimes when you're doing a piece of work and you've actually got a sound design person working on it, I might need to add in sound effects to sections that I think that should have have sound design to it. So it might be that I download free sound, that's the same thing, free sound content from a site, and then I will add those sections into the places that I think will work, and then the sound design person might then take that and then obviously make it a lot better than what I can make it. And there has been times that I have actually done the sound design, but again, like I said, I think that if you get an actual sound design person to work on it, or if you are a sound design person, then you're going to make it a lot more make it sound a lot better than I can, and you might have much more time than I would to make it sound good. Cool, so this is roughly what it looks like. So I'm going to press Command R to get my rulers up. I'm just going to align these two bits here.
Loving the colours.
They're inspired by Glasto, but they're not the exact Glasto colours, because I just wanted them to be a little bit brighter than what Glasto was using, like a little, you know, this is definitely probably more 80s colours, I guess, which I'm into.
Don't worry, so's the chat. I know that there's been a lot of chat in the past around 80s, lots of fans of the 80s.
I was just about born in the 80s, so I've got to love it. Okay, so I'm going to first of all animate this, and I'm going to create shapes from text. I wouldn't advise doing this unless you're totally ready to do it. But this way you can turn it into a path, and then you can animate that path however which way you want. I'm actually going to use it to make the different letters jump up and down. And I've got this plugin called Explode Shape Layers, which I believe you can get on ascripts.com, and it's really useful if you've got an Illustrator file, you bring it into After Effects, and then you want to animate all the different elements within that. Usually you might have to take a group out of a shape layer, copy and paste it onto another shape. This does it all for you. So if I hit explode, it creates 4 layers out of that one bit of type. So now I can move these bits of type individually without having to go into that layer and drop it down and move each one individually, but within the same layer. So if I press all of them and I hit Option P for position, and because this is 10 seconds, I try and make sure all my work loops round. So when I was doing the keyframes before, I did the 3 seconds, and then later on I did 6 to 9 seconds so that it would loop back round again, or even 5 to 8 seconds. So I'm going to make sure this animation happens within 2 seconds, and then that will hopefully loop round when it gets to 10 seconds. So if I've hit the keyframe for all of them, and then say go about here, and then I press the first and third letter and I move those up, and then the second and fourth layer, move those down, and I'm doing this super rough for now, but if I was doing a piece of work I might be a bit more checking that it's actually correct. Cool, and then I just go to 2 seconds and I copy and paste the position from each layer to where my playhead is. So it looks something like this. And then I do the same, I jump into my graph and highlight all of these. So with position, if I move all these down, they all kind of fold down on top of each other until they reach the bottom. It doesn't always do that for other keyframes. I think it does for most of the transform ones, but there's some that doesn't always do that with. So cool. And then this is where I might use a loop. So if I go Alt and click the stopwatch, and then I can go loop, and After Effects actually types it out for you as well, which is really handy. Command A for highlight all, and then I've just copied that and I'm going to paste that into the rest of the layers. So something like that. Now if I pre-comp that, and then I duplicate it, move it back maybe 2 layers. I'm going to add a fill on top of this, which is another great and easy way to, you've got an animation sorted out, but you actually want to change the color. You just stick a fill on top and it changes the whole thing. So you've basically got a new animation in the sense. And I want this to be blue.
And what tips would you give people that are new to After Effects, Georgie? Because it definitely looks a bit daunting when you first get into it.
Definitely, it does look daunting. I think if you have, if you've used Photoshop or Illustrator before in the past, you are definitely a lot luckier than maybe someone who hasn't touched any Adobe products at all, because they look all very similar. The only thing that is different with After Effects and Premiere would be that it's got a timeline, and instead of it being layers in Photoshop where you put things on, all those layers are kind of across this timeline, and each frame has a different sort of look. I would suggest maybe playing around with just the timeline. It doesn't matter what it looks like, but creating something that moves along a position or scaling up and down, and just getting used to those little things at first. And then over time, just experiment. I mean, the more you use the program, the more used to it you're going to get. So just every time you've got, a spare half an hour to an hour, just jump in and have a play, no matter what that might be.
Yeah, that is the best advice. Just have a play. Yeah, I completely agree. It's looking
cool.
good.
So I've ended up with something like this. And I've just repeated that layer with the pink and the blue version, and then just repeated that down there. So if I'm going to hide all those in a pre-comp. So tune, full, and then I'm going to nick this adjustment layer again. And then turn that to dancing, dissolve. Cool, and then I'm going, so this one can be relatively easy. So I'm going to make this sort of jump up and down in scale. So if I do scale, there we go, like that. And then I'm going to turn the link button off, and then just animate it up like that. And then back down again. And this one, so I don't always give it this same graph, but I tend to, if it's looping, so if you've got content that's looping, it's better if it has like an ease in and out. Whereas if you was to do something like this, where it goes quick at the start and then out, and then you try and loop it, it might not look as good. But again, you need to have a play around and see what fits the design that you'll be creating.
Stuart has shared in the chat that he's going to re-watch this one. It's really good.
Ah, thank you.
And I think, Georgie, one of our first questions, I know that time's nearly up now, but one of our first questions was about when you're moving and stretching the text, that it doesn't pixelate. And you mentioned it's all in the export.
Yes.
How would you export this file?
Yes, I can show you that very quickly. So I would go to File, Export, Adobe, Export to Adobe Media Encoder, which is coming up on my other screen. I've actually created a setting within a media encoder because I use this setting so much, and and it's just easier. It just pops up and I click it. Just because for years I was for some reason clicking into settings, changing the settings to exactly the same setting, and then exporting. And I was like, well, I can make a setting for this, which you can see here is the social export. That's just what I've called it. So if I click here, it comes up with all my settings. That's come up on my other screen. So H.264 is the main export setting, which is MP4. I actually don't even know if you can do .movs for Instagram. I've just always done MP4 because it kind of already compresses it, but with a good setting. Like I mentioned before, the size is really important. So just start with that size to start with. For social, 25 frames per second is a winning one, really. So I'd go with that. You always want to make sure that your aspect is square pixels. I don't know what the other settings would be. Yeah, so these all the other settings. Square pixel is just better for sort of dynamic sizing. So if you've got a really random size, you always need to have that in square pixel size. And then if I jump down here, the bitrate normally I think is on VBR one pass. So if you pop it on CBR and then make that around 20. So I'm down here, it says 25 megabytes. As a size, that's okay. So you could always jump that up to say 30. But if you're exporting something that's a minute, that's more likely to be 150 megabytes, which is starting to get on the large side. So I tend to keep it at 20 because that's it tend to keep the quality of it when you're on Instagram. And yeah, that's literally it. That's all the settings are. And then I'll just hit the green button, export it.
Well, thank you, Georgie. We've gone over by a couple of minutes, but it's great stuff. I didn't want to stop you there. I've actually written down everything that you've just said. It's been so good having you here today. Thank you so much. The chat's been great. Honestly, thank you. Please come back. We've got lots of great chat going on. Everyone's really enjoyed your session. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll be back same time tomorrow for more Live on the Sofa at Adobe Live. See you all soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.